Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, and I'm joined today by Rachel Barenbaum, whose book launches today. So happy birthday launch day to Atomic Anna. And I just see, I don't like this. Hold on. That's much better, isn't it? I just realized yes. More of the book. Otherwise, we're these tiny little faces. And Rachel, welcome to the show. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and this amazing book, Atomic Anna, which launches today? Mine is an ARC copy, but they're available for everyone now.
Yes, here we go. I will pull off of my
yours
up there. There we go. That's the final version. Woo, it's beautiful.
It is. I tried to match the fractals. I mean, I always do in my background. So
I love it.
Me. But I tried to in my outfit too. I'm like, I don't have anything in these colors, but now I want something in these colors.
I love it.
Other than being beautiful, tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So Atomic Anna is the story of 3 generations of women who work together to build a time machine and stop the Chernobyl disaster. And then as they go along, what they realize is actually they need to save their own family, right? And work on themselves before they can do anything like stop Chernobyl. So the story has love and science, and it's really this family saga that spans almost 100 years.
It's honestly one of those few books that is hard science fiction, because I read a lot of sci-fi, but a lot of times we get into science fiction where it happens because we say it's science, but there's really no science involved. And there is so much science here that I kept checking your webpage to go, so is she a nuclear physicist? And it says you're an editor, you're a researcher, you used to be a hedge fund manager, you spin. I don't know how physics fits into all this, but it was amazing. And then I'm sitting there going to my husband going, is there such a thing as a graviton? I know this is where the book has exceeded my own STEM background, which is not nearly as much as I think it is. So, but it's hard science, but it still has heart. And I don't know if I've ever read another book that really handles both expertly the way this one does. So, I mean, my hat's off to you. I don't wear a hat, so that there's no. But tell us how you came up with just the whole starting concept. Like, did you want to be doing a time travel book or a family book, or did you just go, this whole thing just needs to happen because there's no other way to approach something as big as Chernobyl?
I mean, so I have been obsessed with this question of what is time since my very first philosophy class in college. And this professor walked in and she said, what is time? And I was like, this is the stupidest class I've ever been to. Right?
The college level course? Come on.
Right. I was like, really? Yeah. But then she said, no, seconds, minutes, hours, we just made all of that up. That is a construct. Yeah. We agreed on it, but it is not something that exists in nature. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why? Why do we care about time? And I've just been obsessed with that ever since. And turns out that Einstein was also obsessed with time, right? And I found him and a lot of what he thought about. And he started off famously working in the patent examiner's office on machines that would be used to synchronize clocks. So, back in the day, you started to run trains from one city to another. You needed to agree on a schedule. So you could say, get ready for the 4:00 train or the 4:05 train or whatever.
And 4 is the same every place.
Right. You have to have synchronized clocks. So he's spent his days looking at these machines, right? These pneumatic tubes, all these crazy ideas. And then he comes across this idea, or he comes to the idea, actually, to synchronize clocks, we need to use light. And, I just thought this was an unbelievable realization, but he started in the philosophy of what is time and why do we care about this? And so it really tackled that in my own way in A Bend in the Stars, my first book, which really went with the first part of relativity. And then I'm still stuck on relativity and these questions of time, right? Like they're not easy. These are big, questions.
And come on, the whole idea of like unified field theory, it's not something that's resolved. So I think there's a lot of room for authors to get in there and go, let me take my take on it before there's actual resolved science, because there's no one to correct you because the scientists don't know yet either.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So, Atomic Anna goes along to Einstein's later ideas and his later thoughts and time travel and his idea that only physicists, there is no difference between the past, present, and the future. Exactly. It's all happening at once. And so, I just thought that's amazing. And I want to write about it. Yeah, and I love time travel books anyway, so there we go.
I do too, and I have this really weird love-hate relationship with time travel because I'm like, on one hand, it's impossible, and I love to read them and go, this is all the reasons why it cannot work. But I always love seeing how it does work in time travel and the different takes on it, because no two authors have the exact same approach and no two movies handle it the exact same way. And I will watch, oh, is there a bad time travel movie? I'm watching it. I don't care how poorly acted it is.
I do too.
And then I sit there and go, okay, so this whole part, and that's half the fun. But I don't know if you've seen the Adam Project.
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, so there are parts where I'm going, so this is basically a much more simplified, Americanized, although slightly Canadianized too, because Ryan Reynolds is the one running around. It had some similar themes where family was at the heart, and where it's like, we've got to look at our own family rather than necessarily just looking at a whole idea of history as the thing to be corrected. Like, maybe it's our family. So I do recommend the very silly movie, mostly if you just want to see both Ryan Reynolds and a child pretending to be Ryan Reynolds, because that's all you're going to get. Don't expect anything where you're going, my mind is blown. This is the newest, most interesting idea ever. It's not, but it's on Netflix. So there you go. But so you ended up with a family here who are Soviet immigrants, and some of them are American born, and dealing with all of that. I'm sure you had absolutely no idea what was going to be going on in the world when you started writing this, to go, hi, you know what? That's kind of in the news right now. And hey, Chernobyl, that's in the news too. I don't know if you had a time machine to know that, to be like prescient to know.
Right. Well, if I did have the time machine, you wouldn't know.
No, that's true. That's true. You would have erased all, and I'd be like, oh, well, the timeline has now fixed itself, and I don't remember any of this.
Yeah. No. Yes. I mean, it is crazy, the coincidence and the timing, and Putin has literally seized a doomed power plant, right? And on this terrible, terrible war that is happening in Russia. But my family roots are there. My grandparents, my great aunts all came from that area of the world. And so, I've always been obsessed with it. Mostly
well, I figured there was a personal reason, and you weren't just like, you know what? I kind of like the whole Chernobyl thing.
Yeah. No. I mean, I grew up, they came from there, and they all said it was the most horrible place in the world. And we weren't allowed to talk about Russia. We weren't allowed to talk about the Soviet Union. We weren't allowed to speak anything but English in my house. And I had to learn French, because speaking French means that you have arrived, right?
Wait, where did you arrive with the French? I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow that. It means you've arrived.
So Russian nobility, the Tsar, right? They all, in the court, they all spoke French. And French has always been seen, the language of the elite or whatever. I mean, these are my grandparents, right? Born in like 1900. These are ancient ideas. We're not talking about modern.
Well, and unfortunately, I have very limited understanding of French government, of Russian government, and most of it has come from the great, and I'm guessing most of that is not accurate. It's definitely not accurate. But again, when Nicholas throws something down, Nicholas Holt, the actor, and says touche, and they're like, no, that's touche. It's like, okay, you think you even know French, you don't. So hopefully you at least knew it was touche and not touche. Hopefully your French was better. All right, that's good. But
I mean, so I grew up thinking this was a terrible area of the world, and so when Putin invaded, the rest of my family was like, we told you. Like, we told you never to go there, right?
Yeah, well, you're glad probably that you're not having to be there right now, but just the ideas of, hey, this is a place where it's gone through these different changes. And one of the ideas you come back to, though, because there are characters who are going, well, the government has changed, but it's still the same people at the top, which I thought is an idea bigger than any particular government, that even with the change, some of the same people still end up on top. And how does that impact people trying to go, am I safe to go somewhere now? Or are they still looking for me because I've got a target painted on my back? Best to pretend I'm dead, which sometimes works, not so much if someone figures out you're not.
But I love that you picked that up. What a careful read. Thank you.
It is the kind of book that, okay, it's a good sized book. The font is not huge. Guys probably can't see it because I've got 75 lights on here to make sure I'm not in the dark. This book is definitely not a book you can just buzz through, and not because it isn't super engaging, because it is. But when we go back and forth between multiple narrators, multiple timelines, lots of science in there, but not so much that it's inaccessible, because it doesn't know as much science as she thinks she does right here. Never got lost in it. But I did mark certain places because I'm like, oh, I want to look this up, or I want to ask you about that, or is that real, or it's just so perfectly written, some of your concepts about time especially, that I wanted to go back and look at them again. And not a lot of books that are about time travel actually have that level of science and that level of, I just want to say, attention to detail, where you really want to go back to those things. You just buzz through them because they're fun. They're like cotton candy, but this is not a cotton candy book, even with the colors. That's kind of cotton candy right there. But it's not. That's not this kind of book. But it's not a textbook. It's not a tome where you're like, well, these are some really dry concepts, because honestly, this is a book about family. And the book about these women, and there's comics involved. And if you guys aren't following Rachel on Instagram or on Twitter, you need to, because there are pictures. So can you tell us who drew these pictures to give us Atomic Anna, Mighty Minerva, and Risa? What is the Rocket Risa? I'm like, why am I blanking on the first part of Risa?
I mean, they're hard names. Yes.
Thank you. It's the rocket part I couldn't remember, like Rocket Raccoon, but it's Risa, not a raccoon.
That's right. It's like I served up the question to you, but I did not. Thank you. I love this question. So, Molly, the middle generation in the book, she is a comic book artist, and she's really inspired by Trina Robbins, who is the mother of the women's comics movement.
And Trina's a real person.
She's absolutely a real person. She's read the book.
Yes.
Yeah, she has read the book. She loved it. Yes, I know. I sent her a copy. It was like the best email I ever got when she wrote back and was like, I loved your book.
Thank you for letting me be in your book.
Yes.
Instead of Ms. Barenbaum, you're going to need to remove all traces of my name.
Yeah, no. I know. Then I would have been so crushed, because it was already it was already sent out. But no, she loved it. She loved it. So I was really happy about that. But anyway, so she's a real character, and Molly in the book is a made-up character who worships Trina Robbins and wants to be like her and wants to draw. And so I talk about this comic book that she comes up with the three characters, and how she uses it to communicate with her mother and her daughter, right, as she time travels, and her father eventually also. So there's this whole idea of the comic book in here. And when I finished the book, I was, I just thought, what if I could find some artists to draw them? And I love new writers and I love new artists. So I reached out to Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's like a modern day Trina Robbins. She's like this amazing. Do you know her? I don't know if you follow comics.
I don't. Like I follow comics just barely enough to go. I know some of the big names, and some of the authors I've interviewed actually also do comics. So it's like you're one who had somebody else do them, but I've had some who they write them and have someone else draw them. So like we've had Jason Starr on Vox Vomitus, and Ben Percy does both. So I don't think I even realized until I started interviewing authors how many authors do both genres, where it's like, oh yeah, this made me become a lot more concise because I only had a bubble this big,
right?
And that changes your writing. But yours, it's like it mentions comics, but it isn't a comic itself, so that's a different take on it.
Right. So I got in touch with Kelly Sue DeConnick, and I said, I love new artists, and my book is all about strong women, and I would love to find some women to draw my comics. Can you help me? And she runs this project, Visible Women. And so she hooked me up with her database and these people. And so I found Angela Wu and Emily Ree, and they drew the comics, and they are amazing. And they're my imagined characters. And so I've just been putting them out there slowly. And it's so much fun to push out other people's work, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's this beautiful hybrid, because you're like, this is how I imagined it. But, I personally can barely draw a stick figure. My kids come up to me like, I need you to draw. I'm like, nope, Rocket, looking at the wrong parent. Go talk to your dad. He can maybe do something. Stick figures.
Yeah.
Well, having someone else, and then that's their skill set and their gifting, and watching the two things come together is like, I love it.
Yeah. And supporting women artists. And these are young women who are looking for work, right? It's still hard for women to get paid in the comics business, in the books business, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm so excited. Yes, I'm so excited to have them out there. So, so you can check them out, and they're on my Instagram. And now I've had people asking me if I would turn the book into a graphic novel. So
it would be about 5 times bigger than this. It would take a long
cut out big part.
But you know what? It's a project that I'm sure people would want to do, because there are people who that's their favorite medium, and why not? I mean, I have no problem with it. I'm definitely in the camp of graphic novels are valid reading, and I love that. I don't know if you're aware of some of the younger books that are coming out for kids, like the Babysitters Club has all been adapted to being graphic novels too. So it's kind of weird me seeing my oldest daughter. I'm like, oh, you're reading Christie's Big Idea. Oh, let me see what Christie looks like. Oh, that's cool. I always picture Christy looked like me because I thought I was Christy. So she doesn't really look how my headcanon works, but I understand that not all main characters are supposed to look like me. That's just egocentrism at its worst. But I did love that aspect because, again, I feel like there's almost this divide between real science fiction and then like comics, and you marry them where it's like, no. And even just the characters' opinions of what Molly, or as she was originally named, Manya, it's like, oh, too Soviet, cannot name her. She's Molly now, she's American, changing her name. Yeah. She has to speak French too. No, she doesn't. They never learned French. That's why that threw me off. I'm like, French, where are we getting the French? But the whole idea of the parents having their own traumas, this generational trauma, to tell you, okay, you can't do the thing that you want to do because, not that we don't think you're good enough, although that was never really expressed until way too late, but the idea of, we need you to do the thing that is going to be safe. It's going to be secure. It's going to be something where you can have a living, because you don't know what it's like to really be hungry, to really not have anything, to be fleeing in the middle of the night. And we don't want you to know those things. And so we're just not going to talk about, there's a wall right here, just not gonna talk about anything on that side. So we're just gonna have this closed. And I feel like that is so true for so many generations, for so many families, where there's trauma on the other side, and then there's awful behavior on this side as far as bad communication between parents and children, because the wall of trauma really prevents them from explaining, this is why I'm like this. This is why I'm trying to steer you this way. And I hope you didn't experience that personally, or maybe you knew other family members who did, but you tapped into that so perfectly. Where did that come from for you?
Where did which part come from?
Any of it. The whole idea of like this generational trauma separating and making this communication being a bad thing. Like, okay, we aren't going to talk about what happened in Russia. We're not going to talk about Baba Anna. We're not going to talk about anything that happened back there. And no, you're just going to need to do math whether you like it or not, because the idea of being an artist, that's not good. So it's the combination of the generational trauma hitting career choices and life choices for the next generation and limiting those choices. Is that something you experienced, or is that something you knew people who experienced?
I mean, so my family, right, they came over from Russia and put up the wall. We were not allowed to talk about it, right? As I said, not allowed to speak Russian. So, I always wondered what happened there. But also, when you think about parenting more generally, there are things you're never going to tell your children, right? Yeah. They are just never going to know the first time you did this or that, right? You're just not, right?
Or you have to figure those things out, because I know, for example, I'm married, but I was divorced before, and my kids are all from my second marriage, and having to figure out, like, at some point I need to let these children know that, but I don't want them to make them feel unsafe in the family they're in now, but I don't want them to come across something because I used a different name before and go, who is this person and where is this name? And have you been keeping things from me? Because then there's a loss of trust if there's that keeping things. So far, only my oldest knows, and it came up in a conversation. And I just wanted, I'm like, if you do have any questions, we can talk about this. So I want her to feel open about that. But there are certain things that's like, details about that kind of stuff, we're probably not going to go.
Yeah. You're not going to know. And you can't, and they can't know, and you'll never know those things either. So that's more of what I find really interesting. Like, how much do you know? And you think you know your parents, but actually you don't. And you really don't know your grandparents.
No.
And you really, really don't know your great grandparents. Like, what did
they were even alive for you? Because a lot of us, they weren't even alive when we were born. Yeah.
Right. Like, what were my grandparents and my great grandparents thinking? Like, if I could time travel and go back to that room, to that moment where they said, we're leaving Russia.
What era was it that they left?
They were leaving around World War I, around the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
So to sit there and think like, wow, hear that moment, because you'll never hear it. You'll never know what it's like. And so that's sort of what I find so interesting and what I'm writing to.
And even if the story got passed down, the perception, and that's something you even kind of address, of what the child perceives, and then not really understanding what's really going through their parents' heads while they're making these decisions, because they're trying to protect their children in the process. And then you remove it by several generations. It's like, I have no idea what was going through their minds and why they decided to come here, or why they decided to take things this way, or why they didn't stay to do this, and what risks they thought they were taking, and all the cost benefit. And of course, you do get into that, because 1917 is somewhere in your book. I'm not going to say where, because this thing, non-linear. So somewhere in here, 1917 might show up at some point in time.
Yeah.
But I have to do both my science research and my history research to double check some of these things, because you have certain events that happen that are referenced, obviously Chernobyl, and Chernobyl was something I was aware of, and I was aware of the Russian Revolution, but the dates and going, okay, so who would have been alive at which time? And I was trying to figure out, like, hey, how old is Risa? What year was she born? How far away in age am I from her? Because we're not that far apart from each other. I'm going, okay, if she was in college this year, I was in high school. Okay,
I
Rice
love that. You were really connecting to her. I
try,
it.
you know, I try to figure out where those things are, and to also figure out, okay, well, then what were the parents have been like? And then learning that Anna was a little older when she had her, that puts her a little bit older than what my parents would have been, because my parents my mother was not a teen mother. She would be very angry if I suggested she was, but having younger parents versus having an older parent changes generationally where you would have been. Yeah. And my parents weren't immigrants. They were in Pennsylvania. That doesn't really count as an immigrant. They immigrated to California. That's a thing. But just the whole idea of, okay, well, what generation are they connecting with, and how does she feel like that? And the other thing you really hit on for multiple generations is the idea of feeling like an outsider. I don't know if that was something that you personally drew from, or if it was other people in your family's experiences.
Well, I mean, I think that you can feel like an outsider, both because, you're a little different, you think differently, or because you come from a different background, right? And when you're at home, you're not speaking English. Right. You can feel very different than when you walk into a classroom and you don't quite understand like little phrases, little, lunch problems. Like when my great aunt used to pack my lunch for me all the time, it was so embarrassing because what did not have the American lunch. So
that's totally true. And I think that's true for different cultures, kids who have different allergies. And I hear about that, about people who are like, people going, oh, it's all well and good now that this kind of food is really trendy, but you same people made fun of me for packing this lunch as a kid. And I've never heard of like a school take on, let's talk about lunches and let's talk about everybody's coming to eat, and don't comment on other people's lunches. And I actually had my child say that people were commenting about her lunches, and I'm like, what's wrong with your lunch? Do you want something different? And it was one of the kids, and I know it's because her mother's very health conscious and thought it was too much processed food. I'm like, you got carrots and apples in there, and are they mad about the chips I gave you? And it turns out that kid buys lunch, so it's like, oh, the fact that it's pre-packed is just, that's just weird. And But people have been doing that for years. I had a friend who had allergies, and so she was always having rice cakes and Vienna sausages because she was allergic to nuts. She couldn't have gluten. And back then, it seemed like that was not as common. And there wasn't gluten-free bread available back then.
Right.
So people were mean to her about that. Like, oh, this is different. So what was in your lunch? And I think probably everybody probably wants that now because
I don't think so.
What was it?
Definitely not. I mean, lots of salami, lots of rye bread, lots of like schmaltz, which is chicken fat.
I'm gonna say I'll pass on the schmaltz.
Yes.
But I happen to love salami, and rye is my absolute favorite bread. So I would like the salami and the rye. I'm not even sure.
But when you're next to kids who have like peanut butter and jelly and an apple,
right? However, the peanut butter kids probably have to sit at a different table now because they're allergies, and it's like, salami is safe. So salami.
That's right. That's right. Now it is.
Next, now I'm going, give me a whole Chianti salami, and it doesn't even have to be refrigerated. Just sit there, gnawing on it. That's probably not a way to make friends, just sitting there gnawing on a whole salami. Like, I hope they sliced it first. Nah, I just had to sit there and chew on it. No.
Yeah.
Well, and you have so many visceral moments in this book, and one of them is like having Molly going, I still smell like chicken fat. Like wherever I go, I still smell like chicken fat. And Rice is like, still smell like chicken fat, just because they work in a butcher. And I like how we watched the elder generation. So Lazar is the one who has first learns how to butcher, but we having to see backing. Okay, so he's in a butcher. How did he get up from here to running a butcher? None of you guys were into that, but then seeing the path people took and how physical skills versus necessarily mental skills would be the marketable ones, especially when you move to a new area, and then their market that they run.
Yeah.
Was that something that you pulled from family history?
Yeah, my family did run a butcher shop. And, it is true. I knew lots of other, generations, people who came that, weren't able to practice, like you were saying, anything that they could do with their head, right? Like if you're a physician in your country or a dentist in your country, doesn't mean that that will easily
The
transfer to
licensing
Yeah.
often doesn't. You hear someone who goes like, "Oh, you run this little business. That's great." It's like, "Yeah, well, I'm a doctor in my country."
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, because it doesn't necessarily translate here, and you may not have the time or the money to go back and do that here.
Right. Right. So instead, jobs like being a house cleaner or a butcher or something that is more physical or menial or whatever, doesn't require the same kind of license, is where people end up. So you see a lot of that.
You talk about paperwork too, and not
Yes.
who's been doing paperwork, but the idea that some of
Having
the
a social security card.
Yes, it's like, well, which areas check for you and which don't, and are you able to run this? Or okay, well, how did you come over here if there weren't papers? And it's like, okay, well, you're an American, and talking about how differently people will be treated because, like, well, you were born here, you're an American, you have to hide in the shadows because you're not. And the fact that hasn't changed even a little bit, I think, like you still hear about that, everything from the Dreamer Act and all this stuff, where it's like, okay, so because you don't have the right paperwork, the American dream is off limits to you. And that just breaks me every single time. Oh, Joanne says, yes, rye bread and schmaltz. Okay, I guess Joanne's probably had the schmaltz and doesn't. I don't even know how do you get the chicken fat? Is it is it cooked? Or is
so you have to render it. You get it off the back of the chicken, and you cook it with onions or garlic, and until you cook it down till it's clear, and then you pour it out and you let it cool, and then you spread it like jelly or peanut butter on bread.
See, I'd probably eat that though, because I'm the one, like my family, they kind of go back and forth. My husband only eats white meat. Like we're kind of the reverse Jack Sprat, where he only wants the white meat, and I'm like, give me the meat with the bone and the fat still sitting on it. And it's the same with chicken, where it's like, oh, here's some of the extra chicken fat and just putting that on my plate. And then I wonder why I'm sick afterwards, because I don't have a gallbladder anymore, so I can't actually process any of these things. So I probably shouldn't try schmaltz, but now I kind of want to. I don't know if I go to a local deli, if they'll be able to get me schmaltz, or if they'll look at me like, what are you talking about? Get out of here.
I love that we're talking about this. I mean, you could render an entire big jar of it, right? Yes. And then you just spread it, so you have it for a month. That's how
and then you just
worked in my family.
What else do you do with it? And that's kind of also the idea of a non-waste culture of, hey, we don't have a lot, so here's this perfectly good thing that has good things we need. And I know in American culture today, oh, fat is bad. And I keep telling my children, fat is necessary for your brain. So how about you go eat some more fat? All right. Yeah. And different kinds of fats are different and all that stuff. And I'm not trying to give anybody an artery clogging meal, but I mean, schmaltz will probably do it. Just inject it straight in. Not a good idea. Yeah. Joanne says, yes, it's very fatty. No one's saying you have to go try it afterwards, Joanne. It's fine. But having all this and doing all this with everything from okay. Jen has to say, my husband is obsessed with Russian rye bread. He talks about it all the time. Her husband is Russian and therefore probably knows the best Russian rye and can direct us to the right.
Or it's actually black bread.
It probably is, because I've seen different kinds where there's barely any caraway, but I've had different things where I will just take the jar of caraway seeds and just dump it directly on what I'm eating. It's kind of hard to chew, but I don't care. I really like the flavor. The caraway is what's in the rye bread, the little seeds. For people who are like, what are you talking about, caraway seeds? Sorry, can't help it. There was food involved, and therefore I got distracted by the food, which I usually do. The other thing you also have in here these people who are doing math contests.
Yes.
Do people actually watch math contests?
I mean, yeah. Why wouldn't you?
What are you watching them do?
Amazing. You can watch them. I mean, it's like a debate or whatever, right?
But debate, they're talking. Are they talking through the math? Are you watching them? Are they doing it on whiteboards? Because
but you get you hear the question and then you wait for the answer. And sometimes if it's with teams, in the book, it was individual. But if you're with teams, you see the team come together.
Everybody's seen now Spider-Man Homecoming, where they've got the academic decathlon team and they're answering the questions. We've all seen that. I think there was probably an episode of Saved by the Bell with that too. There was an episode of Saved by the Bell with everything. So probably. But everybody knows that. I've never heard of a math competition. I mean, I did mock trial. I did JSA. We never had a math competition. I don't think our area was necessarily good enough at math. So maybe not. That could have been don't mean to slam Anaheim. We weren't necessarily known for our math. Still, so they're doing these individual things. And this is one of the sweetest moments, because this is when Daniel's like, I'll watch you. She's like, why would you want to watch me? And I'm like, I'm with you. Why would you want to watch him? But Daniel, for people who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, well, because it came out today. So you're all forgiven for not having read it today. There will be a quiz next week. You have a week to read this. I'm kidding. But Raisa is the youngest in the generation of three women, with Anna, Molly, who was originally Manya, and then Raisa, and she does math because, unlike her mother, who's like, no math, Raisa, that's her language, and she just intuitively understands this. And one of the characters she connects with is another immigrant from Russia who is still learning the language, still feels more of an outsider because she was born here and he was not. And he stays and watches her math competition. It's like, that's the sweetest way to ever, I don't know.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you like it. I mean, I love a good love story. So yes. I had to throw that in.
Well, and you do, because I wouldn't say, oh, this is a romance. It's not a romance, guys. It's not a romance, but it has the feels that I require for romance. Like the joke for this show is I have the genres that I do, and sometimes they cross, sometimes they're nowhere near each other. But the number one thing I need for any romance, either as a story or as a storyline, is the feels and the connection. And I just loved these two characters together. There was something so sweet, and I don't want to say naive, but very innocent about them. Yeah. And you rarely read stories like that where it doesn't come across as, okay, we're back to schmaltzy, because there was nothing schmaltzy about their relationship. And it was the healthiest of any of the relationships that you depicted, because the rest, we have to talk about some of these dysfunctional relationships we have going on for multiple generations, with Anna and her husband, who is I'm going to get his name right. Is Vasha?
Yasha.
Yeah. Okay. Because the two of them, that was not the best relationship. And then Yulia and Lazar are like step parents. Theirs was more healthy. But then we get to Molly and Victor. And yeah, please tell me there's no Victor in your family tree.
So
look, you have a family tree?
Beautiful family tree in the finished book.
Mine doesn't have a family tree.
I know. So we had this problem as the book was coming out. Yeah. I found that as I got more and more readers, and it wasn't just, like my mom and my editor.
Mom loved it.
Right. People were getting lost with all the characters. And so I said, I really pushed hard, and I was like, we need a family tree. We just need to do that. And so in the end, we have this gorgeous family tree that explains everything, including the fact that Molly is Manya in Russia, right? And everything is in there. So
is Lazar's sister in there too? Because I see Lazar, but I don't see his sister.
No. You just see that.
Can I just write it in?
You could write it in. Yeah, that would be fine.
What about his sister? She's there too.
We didn't go that deep. But, there's so many characters. And in a very typical Russian novel, like Dostoevsky type novel, you get like the cast of characters, and it's a big like 5-page intro on each one. So I did not want to do that, but I was very excited to do the family tree.
Well, and I didn't feel like there were too many characters. Like the Yasha versus Vasha, honestly, I think that I know a dancer with that name. So I'm probably just turning him into a ballroom dancer. That's my own problem. But trying to make sure I'm like, okay, so this pair goes here, and then doing that. I didn't have too much trouble following it, but it also helps that you have comics with each one of them, that you go with Atomic Anna and then Mighty Minerva, although now you've changed your name again from Molly to Manya, or it's Manya, Molly, Minerva. It's all the same person. If it's an M, it's the middle one.
I know.
And then Rice at the bottom.
People have loved the Daniel character. And in particular, one of my artists, Angela Wu, drew him and drew Yasha. And they're just amazing. And the fan response to those two has been like amazing. Like the sexy scientist, like sexy butcher. People have loved them.
Thighs are touching. It's like, ooh, their thighs touch. They're just sitting in a lab, but their thighs were touching. It's like, ooh, I didn't even realize that was a thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is funny because I'm usually reading multiple books at a time, and I try to always do one in my ear, one in the computer, and one physical. And the different medium lets me kind of separate them so I don't combine things. But since I finished your book a couple days ago, I picked up the book that I had on hold, which is The Love Hypothesis, which is like, this is also romance with STEM. Very, very different. But it's like, I wonder if their thighs are going to touch in the laboratory. Now it's this expectation for me that you've started, Rachel. So I'm going to blame you if it doesn't happen. I give the book 2 stars. No thighs touched in the laboratory. Total fail. But again, I even loved how you had this relationship between Yulia and Anna that isn't like any other relationship I've ever read, because it's kind of inexplicable. It's more than sisters.
Yeah.
And
so sorry.
That's okay. It's more than sisters, and it's because they aren't related, and it's more than a friendship, and yet it's not exactly romantic, but there are those feelings too. And then the relationship's changing, and how Anna feels towards Yulia when Yulia is with Lazar, and then this own person in her relationship, and like not really knowing what to do with him half the time, going,
well,
I
Anna,
feel about you, but I don't really know. And it's not like Yulia, how I feel about her, but I guess you can stay.
I mean, that was Anna's first love, was Yulia, so really I wanted to explore that, and this idea of, heartbreak, and you can still move on. So maybe it was different, right?
It was.
But she still, she gave her child to her first love. So
I don't think she would have been able to do that with anybody other than Yulia. And especially knowing, and a slight spoiler, but that Yulia had wanted children and couldn't have children. And Anna was really not trying for the baby that showed up. And that's kind of how life works too, that the people who were like, I really want children and nothing's working. And someone else is like, well, here's a kid that I don't know how this showed up.
Right.
Guess I'm a parent now? Maybe? I don't know.
Right.
Could be.
Right.
But it was a beautiful relationship, and the complexities of all the relationships were just handled just dynamically, so that it wasn't, okay, all the relationships look the same and all of them are either perfect or all of them are dysfunctional. They were all kind of on this gradient of, let's rank them and let's send them all to group therapy. They could get a discount rate, honestly.
Yeah, they would need it.
They would need it. They could probably pay in schmaltz. Like, here you go. I don't know how else you pay for it. I don't know what they're doing in Little Russia as far as being able to have family therapists for multi-generations.
I mean, they would just beat each other or something. I don't know.
That is not a healthy approach. Violence is not the answer to emotional stuff, no matter what the Academy Awards might tell you.
Oh, right.
We're not going there. That's fine. I need to take off Jen's black bread comment's been there. Okay. And Linda says she really enjoys a healthy relationship in a story. And I do too. And I think you kind of need both kinds, because sometimes as a reader, if you see something that's so idealized, you end up feeling like, well, I can't connect to that. Yeah. But then if everything's always bad, then there's no hope. Right. And if there's one thing that this story absolutely has, it's so much hope, even in the spite of tragedy and government oppression and all of these things. There's still hope, and hoping that things can be better either for us or for the next generation.
Well, I mean, Reza and Daniel also are young still.
Yes.
And I think it's easy to over sexualize or give too many complicated feelings to younger relationships that are really much more about, raw emotion or raw sexual tension, as opposed to
he's been doing all those push-ups.
Yeah, right. Exactly. As opposed to like the deep, heavy, by the time you're in your 40s, like there's so much other stuff going on when you think about love and relationships and kids, right?
Yeah.
But when you're 20, it's like you're hot, and right,
there's a lot of hormones.
There's a lot of hormones, and there's just a lot of, and I think I want to go to college, and I've got to get good grades, and I also want to really kiss you, right? So there is a simplicity to it that I did want to capture, because I think a lot of people try to gloss over that and make children's or teenage relationships, they're not kids, much more complicated than many of them are, in fact.
Oh, I think that's very true. And I think sometimes, especially if you're reading YA, if that's the driving story, they probably need to, in order to make it just more interesting than just this passion. But when it's one of many, many storylines, I think you can make it more realistic and more believable and more true without losing anything where people are like, this many pages for just that? Like, just like no, there's a lot going on in there. You're good.
That's absolutely right. If that was the, heart of the novel, it would have been very boring.
It would have been a much smaller book, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have, so we might be getting a merchandise for the comic books and maybe something like that along the line. Do we get bear pendants, and where do I get a bear pendant?
Oh, thank you.
I would like bear pendant. I'm sorry. I don't wear a lot of jewelry. I have like 2 necklaces. I have earrings I occasionally remember to put in my head till the ears, like the holes close. But every so often something comes up, and the bear pendants are central to the novel. They are beautifully designed, and the bear at rest, the bear at war. I love that so much, and I'm going, do these exist, and may I have one? Like, how do I get merch?
I love it. Thank you. They're totally in my head. They don't exist. But I just love the idea of, right, you have two sides to every person, someone at
Yes.
war, right? Your side at war and your side at peace. And which one will you find and how do you balance them? So it was a big symbol in the book. It like smacked
Huge.
you over your head a little bit too much, maybe, but
no,
I loved it.
not too much, but it was also very Russian with the bears. And again, I'm going back to the Great, and Catherine's got like the bear just following her around for a while. It's like, are bears really tame? And considering like the one Russian cartoon my children have seen is Masha and the Bear, that I think in my head, bears are domesticated in Russia, which is not true.
They're not.
I really do like the bears.
Yeah, they will hurt you. Do not
They
go
will
near
hurt you.
bears.
They're not pets. We are not domesticating bears.
No, do not go near bears.
My middle, who it's her birthday today, thinks foxes should be domesticated. And we're like, we're not buying you a fox. So sorry, kid.
Not pet a fox either.
No. I mean, I've seen some people do that, but she got a new fox stuffy and is all about foxes right now. So I guess it could be worse. She could want a pet bear. We're like, no, we're not getting you a bear either. That is not a good choice. So this is your second novel. What is in the works after this?
So the next book that I'm writing is very different, very, very different. It is set at 9/11 down at the site where the World Trade Center fell. I was there.
Well, you're just like blowing things up then, because we've got explosions and then more explosions and things, lots of people dying.
I know. And I was down there. And it's not a memoir. It's definitely fiction. I don't write memoir. And I just felt like it was time. Like I can do this. I can finally write about it. So that
it's not so close anymore that I think people would be open to reading it. I think if you would have written this book 10 years ago, we would have been like, no, I'm not ready to revisit that just yet. I'm not ready to go back. And you were there. We said hedge fund manager. So were you working in that area at the time?
Yeah, so I was down on Maiden Lane. I was literally next door. I mean, I was literally there. I saw the whole thing. And it was very, very, very scary. But again, I will have a woman at the center, a very smart woman. And she's the hero. She's leading the day and pushing forward. And so hopefully I can come back on your show and we can talk about it then.
Well, and if there's not enough science for me to qualify this, will it still be sci-fi? Does it fit in the speculative realm? What genre would you pitch this as? And honestly, genre pitching is my weakest point possibly ever, where I'm like, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think of myself as having any sort of magical realism or whatever in sci-fi in my books, and yet I wrote a whole book about a time machine. So, so here I am.
It's all hard sci-fi, and that's totally fine. But at the same point in time, there are these different elements that kind of flow in and out. And you're telling me 9/11 and that it's not a memoir, so we're like, okay, we're taking that out of the narrative nonfiction realm, and it is what?
And yet there is a magical ship. So it's like there. So yes. So it's not, so I'm telling you, like in my head, I'm like, it's really fiction, and it's, there's nothing in it that is sci-fi, and yet there's a magic ship. So we'll see.
Like, I just can't help myself. It just showed up.
It just showed up.
It just shows up, and no one really plans for it. No one expects a magical ship. It
does. I mean, I think like letting your imagination go is what stories are for, right? It's
exactly.
Easier to say something with a magic ship than like, right?
Well, yeah, we can we just hide. I know I just hide my life behind, like, I just put my characters, it's just me in a different color wig. And then I'm like, this is how I worked through this trauma. Here we go. Ta-da! That works. And so
you can send them in a time machine too.
I know. And I've addressed time, but not time machines. And I've addressed Pizzly bears, because bears are still close to my heart. I'm like, there is such a thing as a Pizzly bear. I did not make that up. And polar bear meets grizzly bears, and apparently they breed. They are not supposed to, but they do. Wow. Those bears get it on a lot more than the panda bears, because those pandas, they don't even.
We're back to just raw hormones.
I know, poor bears and their hormones. The bears and their hormones. It's very sad. But anyway, I just was asking because this show is supposed to be speculative fiction, science fiction, and romance. And Vox Vomitus, which is a show that I co-host with Jennifer Ann Gordon, that's all genres. So it's like, if we can't allow you through the doors of the science fiction, there's another place that we will definitely want to talk about your book. But if there's a magic ship, you're fine. You're fine. Magic ship. You had me at magic ship.
Okay.
And with that, we'll let you go finish writing your book. Or are you in the editing stage now? Where are you with it?
I feel like editing is constant from day one.
For me, yeah.
Right?
Well, I do. I know some people everyone has a different process. Some people are very much a vomit draft, and then afterwards they go back and fix things. I'm the kind where I will mess with the first sentence until I like it, and maybe won't get very far because that's just how I work. And then hopefully then, unless an editor outside myself tells me to fix things, it should be done when I'm done, at least for first draft purposes. So you're editing as you go.
Yeah.
And
but we'll see. But I'm editing, you know, all the way up into the end. So I am constantly in the editing stage.
Exactly. Like, it never stops. Editing is just purgatory. I'm still here. I'm still editing.
It is.
Well, I'm excited to read that next one. I actually need to go back and find your first one too, because this was a book where I got to be discovering a new author who wasn't really a new author anymore, because this is a brand new book, but it's not your debut. So everybody, if you haven't pre-ordered this or going and buying this, please do. You can go find the first one, which is A Bend in the Stars, which also sounds pretty sci-fi to me. And then look for it. Does the third one have a title yet?
No.
Or working title? Yeah.
Still working
on
it.
Titles will change. Titles get thrown out the window, and then someone publishes a book with nothing to do like yours, but has the same title, and then that one gets just no.
That's a nightmare.
Title. You're like, you don't want that. Try again.
Allison, it's so much fun to talk to you. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you could join me today. Happy release day. Everybody, please go out. Yes, get your copy of Atomic Anna, and we will be back on May 3rd with Andrew DeYoung with The Attempts. And I just look at that.
That is an amazing cover.
Isn't that fun? And the premise is they're underemployed, underpaid, and trying to survive the end of the world while trapped in an office complex. I also want to play it as a video game. So somehow it's a book. I'll have to read it and find out.
I would totally read that. I'm going to go get a copy.
You're like, go find it. I don't know if it's out yet. I think you probably have to get it on.
I'm going to write to the publicist.
Like, please give me a copy of the pretty shiny green book.
Yes.
You're famous. You can do that. You were featured today in the New York Times. I just posted out just before I came live. I'm like, New York Times. Yeah.
Dream.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey, go party, Rachel. We'll let you go. Thank you, everybody.
Allison, thank you.
You're welcome. See you later, guys. Bye.